Welcome to today's show. My guest is Michael Peterson. We met in Nexability with my friend Sydney Elaine Butler, who is part of the NeuroDrive team. And Michael is just the most incredible soul. Oh my gosh. He read a poem that just hit me all in the feels, and he's going to share it with you guys today. And we're just going to have a fun flow conversation because Michael is just an amazing human, and I just cannot wait to introduce you to him. Let's get going.
Hi, I'm Carole Jean, late identified autistic ADHD human, and your host of the Mind Your Autistic Brain talk show and Burnout Restoration Unveilers community. You're about to experience the new way to thrive as a neurodistinct brain and body by getting off the chronic cycle burnout loop for good. By unveiling your authentic self, defining what thriving feels like for you, knowing your burnout signpost, so those top 20 burnout warning signs are a thing of the past, and stepping into your best life as the creator and leader you are meant to be. Get ready, because this is where we go against the mainstream, say no to outdated self-care tips, and we say yes to who we are in order to create an energized, authentic, peaceful, and harmonized world. Welcome to Mind Your Autistic Brain.
I said, I love the intro.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much. I love this song. Like, it just is happy. It makes you want to dance. And it's like, how can you feel sad or gloomy when you hear like just that lifts you up, And I just love that. So, Michael, you and I met in Nexability where we were having a conversation about intersection and being a Black person and autism and all of the intersectional things that happen. And that's just like a really big part of an important conversation that I think isn't happening nearly enough in the world. It's just not, you know, it's not happening for women. It's not happening for people of color. And if you got more than one intersectional spot, it's really not happening unless, we're sitting here having a conversation about it and really making sure that that's happening, because like the rest of the world's not talking about that. And I loved that we had this whole night where you were sharing what your experiences were. Other people in the group were sharing what their intersectional experiences were. And it was such a beautiful place, because it was like, I felt this energy in the room that people were like, we're being seen and heard collectively together in that space.
Yeah.
And you were so, oh my gosh, like you had me crying, like tears of joy that night when you shared, especially your poem. So how did you come to the knowledge that you were autistic? I mean, how did this whole thing happen for you? Like, how did that conversation like come into your world? Because it's not like you knew from birth. So how did
Right.
this happen for you?
Yeah. So actually, it kind of smacked me over the head. So with that intro, why I enjoyed it so much was because of the discussion of burnout. So that's pretty much what happened, where I had moments of like meltdowns, but when I went to get help for them, they diagnosed me with something else. So I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and that was like all right for a while. But then I was at work, and I remember like facing what I now know is kind of autistic burnout, where my brain would shut down. Like I knew how to do the job, but like I would like look at the screen and like I just couldn't do anything. Like I was just pretty much frozen, and like people were like, "What's wrong with you?" It's like I felt stupid. Like there was a lot going on. It was very stressful. But then it kept on happening, and I thought it was like just me. Just I have to figure out how to get this job done, and like I just gotta, there's like a bunch of ego started coming into play. But that didn't work out, and that in a combination with a bunch of like this myriad of experiences of like, why is this going? Because I always knew that I was different, so to speak. I felt different. I felt like I saw things that people didn't. I felt like I noticed certain things, but I felt like there was a lot that I couldn't convey the fact that I saw all that or perceived and received all of it. Um, and I had always looked into mental illness and mental health awareness. I'm very into psychology and stuff. So I was reading all of these things, and happened upon um, like autism and neurodivergence, and I had been looking into it for a long time. Um, and I had noticed that there was a lot of like similarities between um, what actually made the big click was I went on YouTube and I got a perspective of like autistic adults, like from their perspective and not like from like the DSM-5. And that was really what made the click was listening to the channel. The name of the channel is escaping me, but he's an adult and he talks about his experiences through autistic burnout. So I was like, this is a one for one. And I started looking into that, and I started looking into um, just more and more research, and that was like about a year and a half. And then happened to be talking with some of my friends, and I had shared with one of my friends about how I was like, "Hey, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that I think that I'm autistic, but I think I'm autistic." But I hadn't told anybody yet. So they were in the group, and they were like, I know that you haven't told anybody yet, so I don't want to like just out you. Are you okay with me sharing this? And I was like, yeah. And then they were like, yeah, well, like, I know that you think like you've been noticing that you might be feeling this kind of way. And then one of my other friends was like, oh, really? I'm autistic. And you're allowed to like be self-discovered. And then we just started talking about our experience. We had already related on like a lot of things. And they were they also very into researching neurodivergence, schizophrenia, and mental health. That was like their interest. So after that, like I started having a lot of conversations with them, and through that, like I kind of normalized referring to myself in that kind of way. And I was like, oh, you know what, this makes way so much more sense than like everything else, honestly.
Oh my gosh, like that, yes. So much yes in that. That's one of the things that's how most people come to their identification late in life is through a burnout.
Yeah,
Like, really, like, the worst like, you've had burnouts throughout your whole life, you just maybe didn't know it, but it's like you come to this identification through probably the worst burnout you've ever experienced. And, Doug Bletcher and I were talking about this not long ago. He and I both were, like, talking about meltdowns and shutdown, and it was interesting because I was like, I don't really have meltdowns per se, and it's not like they happen very often. I mean, I have had them, but they're really, really few and far between. For me, it was like shutdowns. Like, I would shut down, and I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. And when I was shutting down, like, when you were talking about, I was, like, in my brain as you were talking going, "You got the freezies." I call them the freezies, like, you just get stuck and it's like you just freeze. And it's
yeah,
almost like you disconnect, like, this disembodied
hmm,
experience, and it can be really terrifying to, like, after the fact, because in the moment, you're totally just, like, zoned out, disconnected, but it's like once you start to realize that it's happening or that it has happened, then it's almost scary. Like, it
yeah.
made like, when I experienced that, sometimes it would, like, make me feel like I was losing my mind, and I was scared to tell anybody.
I definitely felt like that for sure.
Yeah,
Like I was
and just being
losing my.
having your friends be willing to, like, open up and even ask you, like, "Hey, I know you're thinking about this. Is it okay to share it?" I mean, oh my gosh, what a nice friend, first of all.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for the friends I have. I think that they've been such an important support in like my discovery journey. That like you saying that it's scary because you feel like you're like basically going insane. I very strongly that even that also is like a whole rabbit hole of like my touch, my like relationship with the idea of sanity with what I was experiencing was like because I associated sanity with being neurotypical, but I didn't know that. So because there were so many ways that I wasn't that, I was like, oh, and I also had a lot of like my family was like telling me I'm crazy and stuff. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I am crazy. Maybe I'm just crazy, honestly. But now I know I'm not. So thank you to all of my friends. Y'all know who you are. I love you. Thank you.
I'm telling you, our friends are the things that they're the network, the support that will save us sometimes from ourselves even. It's just
Yeah.
such a necessary that's why community is such a huge part of this just journey in late identified life for me. It's why I want to make sure that I create it, because I never had it growing up. I played by myself. I wanted friends, but I never was able to like make friends. And I had friends, and looking back now, they were definitely the neurodistinct folks in the bunch, and we were vibing with our tribe, right?
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I never like had sustained friendships like I wanted, or what I thought they were supposed to be, right? And then it was like by the time I got through with 8 hours at school and would come home, I didn't really want to talk or play with anybody else so much. I really just wanted to like hang out in my closet where I had built my little Barbie doll world and just play or veg out and watch Batman.
Yeah,
That was
yeah, I had to decompress. I definitely relate to that very strongly. My first friend in elementary school actually was also autistic. Like they told us that, and I remember it's just funny thinking back on it because I just they told me, I looked at him and I was like, you don't really seem that much different from me. So I was like, I didn't like they were trying to explain to me like what it was at the time. Like Asperger's, these are the symptoms. I'm like, well, that sounds like me. So like, and I'm thinking that I'm not autistic. So I was like, I just didn't understand at the time. Um, my how I grew up, I would go home and my parents would come home like 3 hours later. They'd be from work, so I had a lot of alone time. And I think that having the connection, that like I thought like that's just because that's how I grew up. I just got a lot of alone time. Not no friends. Like I mean, people at school, they weren't really vibing with me. A very common story with undiagnosed autistic people. Um, and then I'd come home and I'd have complete silence, and it was like this is peace, you know. So it took when I got older and kind of realizing how like all these experiences fit into like who I am now, realizing that oh like this is how I got here. Whereas like I'm very like isolative, um, and when I feel that I'm about to like melt down or like get too much, I tend to just like disappear. Like I'll just like I'm gone. I'll go somewhere else. I go a different room, or I just leave the entire function. Um, which it has been an interesting journey. Like I'm working on expanding and being more outward and more, networking and building and more intentionalizing my relationships. And that has only been the case after understanding myself as a neurodivergent person, because before I just thought it was impossible. So very
one of
cool.
the things that has come up in a couple conversations. Well, I say a couple, okay, lots of conversations. Let's just be honest. And it's just like before we know that we're neurodistinct, when we just like leave a party because we've just had enough, or we do things because we've just reached a point that our system, we're just maxed out. We're at capacity and we've done all we can do, and we retreat. There's like the shame storm that comes up of like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. I'm so embarrassed. Or, then I feel like I have to apologize and then explain why I did things and all that. I mean, is that something that's come up for you by chance?
All the time, definitely. Um, and it's always a balance too, because I think I've just been blessed with a like my close friends. They're very understanding. Um, so, and it wasn't always like that, obviously, but I think I've navigated around to people who like are on the same vibration of like, oh, they're very understanding. Like they understand. It's like, oh, like I like text my friend after like, hey, I'm sorry I didn't say bye. Like I just had to dip, and then be like, yeah, it's fine. Um, but that was something that was really big where a lot of times. All right, so like rewind. Interesting thing was there was this point in like growing up where I was like the clown. So like I was in the sense of like people viewed me as like the guy who was joking, like brighten up the room and stuff like that. And that sort of became a mask after a while, where it was like even if I didn't feel that way, like I felt like I had to perform that role. So that became like my anchor of like the social anxiety that I was experiencing. Like if I didn't properly perform my role in the environment, I felt like I failed. So it's like if I wasn't in the mood, or if I was starting to be like less talkative, or if it's like I had my held my face in a funny way, like very hyper vigilant towards like everything, like my face was like that, or I looked at them too long, or I forgot to smile when I looked at this person, like my inner voice would just go to town on me after. Like I just be chilling in my room and it's just like bop, 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 like you did this, you did that, oh now they hate you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, it was exhausting for sure.
And, that's one of the things that is one of the biggest contributing factors to neurodistinct burnout is our
Mm,
thoughts. I mean, bless those folks who only have like 70 to 90,000 thoughts a day. Love that you have that quiet mind. There are those of us with like 180,000 to 270,000 thoughts a day.
yeah.
And it's exhausting, especially when like the energy or the charge, because our thoughts are electrical impulses in
Hmm.
our synapse, and they have a charge. And the emotion that's attached to that has that charge, and it carries either it's going to invigorate us or it's going to drain us. And I think so many of us have that internal monologue, that thought thermostat that's like running in the background going, "Why didn't you do that?" Or, "Oh my gosh, that person's going to think you did this and this." And you're replaying the conversation in your head for like a week on loop, trying to
Right,
make sure you didn't miss something, because the experience in our life has been that in a conversation somehow we've missed something and then it's cost us something down the road, right?
right, exactly. It made me realize too is that I thought that my mind wasn't working fast enough because I didn't respond or react quick enough. When sometimes it might be the inverse of that, where it's like there's too much going on that I have to sort through that makes me slow down. Like when you have a lot of options on a menu. And realizing that, I was like, okay, I'm definitely gonna be more accepting of myself. That's been a big thing to help me actually like maneuver through a lot of the difficulties that I may experience with like friction amongst how I'm expected to act versus how I feel compelled to act, is separating my identity from the behavior, and understanding like the cause and effect that led me there, and then going back to the cause, and then seeing like how I feel about that from that level, and then from there you can pivot and think of, okay, how can I act in a way that is alternative from the original, but like still fulfilling the underlying need that made me react this way to
Okay,
begin
so
with.
you guys just heard why I fell in love with this guy, right? Like, just this right here. Oh my gosh. Totally. Like, oh, your brain is so juicy. I love it. Like, you just hit, okay, let's just talk spiky profiles, right? I mean, this is the thing that camouflaging, that's masking to the professional level of like where you are masked in all scenarios, like sitting at home doing something all by yourself because you have become that's become something that's like the masking protective survival mechanism that you've used for so long that it's just you're using it home alone and that
Right,
you can't like decloak, right? Like the Romulan ship, it does not decloak around here. And it's really, you talked about something that I think is really important, and this was something I didn't recognize to put words to it. Like I felt it because that's the thing, is like I would feel things. I'm also alexithymic, but I wasn't able to put words to it to explain it. And like when you were talking about finding a YouTube video where somebody was talking about their experience of adult autistic burnout, it was like that's what has really been the biggest help for me, is to be able to have conversations, because I can feel things, but I can't always articulate it or have the right word to put with it. And one of those things was what's called a spiky profile. So for you guys who are maybe just like joining us or just kind of come into this conversation, spiky profiles are like, you can be super, super good at something. Like this is your strength and where you just naturally excel. And then there's something that is equally on the opposite end of something that like you really struggle with. It's just not something that you're very good at. But the way the world perceives it is because you're really good at this one thing, you should have an equivalency in your performance in these other areas. And then they're just like, are you being obtuse? Are you being difficult? Are you being dumb on purpose? Are you like trying to manipulate me to do this because I mean, you can do all of these things over here like super fast and no problem and everybody else struggles with it, but like this simple thing you're struggling with? I mean, what's up with that? And it's really tough. I mean, has that been something that's like come into your world? Because I was kind of hearing you talking about it, I think.
Yes, just a big fat yes. Like that whole thing,
I love that emphatic yes.
like oh my god, so much because for me, like that spiky profile thing, which I'm taking that, putting it in my pocket. Um, that was like school basically. So like in our conversation, something that happened towards the end was uh, Keisha had brought up like we went to school together, and she was like Michael was like a very good student and so on and so forth, like very participating and whatnot. Like I would have never known, and like I feel like that kind of plays into like the whole spiky profile thing because I was very good at math. Like I mean I still am. I'm good at math and science, and like I like to learn, and like I like my mind being stimulated in that way. Um, and also another thing was is that like um, a lot of times it felt like the classroom environment was one of my places to speak about my genuine interest. Like I was genuinely passionate about these things. So raising my hand in science class was me being wasn't about like being smart. It was about like I actually care about the diameter of Jupiter, and I was like weirdly fascinated in that kind of stuff. So, but then it was like if my room was disorganized or like I was struggling with like something else, like picking something off a menu. It's like, you're so good at math. How come you can't do this? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's not the same thing. And I never had a word for it. So it was so frustrating. But now it makes a lot of sense.
And there's like this internalized piece of that you really start to like beat yourself up. And then it's like those like perfectionist type tendencies come out because it doesn't feel safe. Like it's not okay. And it doesn't feel safe for me not to be good at this because people react or respond so strongly when I don't do this well. And so then it's like, then you almost like hyper focus and like try and force yourself to be good at something and then not ask for help and not tell anybody that you're struggling with something. And then I can look back on things like that and I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's definitely telling. This is an important conversation because it's unpacking a lot for me. Like there's some experiences that I haven't really put in that context yet that it connects to like my attachment to like independence, for example. Like I felt like I did have to do things by myself because people already viewed me as someone who had it all together. Like, oh, he's so good at math and whatever. That like, why would he need help and stuff? And I started to, like you're saying, believe that about myself. So I wouldn't ask for help. Also, because sometimes I'd ask when I did ask for help, people would like automatically perceive me like as like up here, like oh like why do you need help from me? Like you should already have this figured out. I'm like I really don't, and it's like I need help. Like I don't know how else to say it. Um, so then it got to a point where um, there was like internal resistance around asking other people for things, um, and that bled so far. That bled even into my adult life with being able to ask for like just help like logistically getting to places like when I'm in a financial bind and it's like I have people who actually do care. Um and that was the second thing where it's like once you get to a point in life where people aren't reflecting like your trauma, it's like now it's like you have to I have to stand up because now it's just me. it's not someone else like, you know, being mean to me. It's just me kind of holding on to that. Um, and that's a big thing that led me to, like, I did, addressing this whole neurodistinct identity, um, was the fact that there's aspects to it that I really enjoy about myself. There's aspects to it that, um, on the flip side of that, you know, that spiky profile thing, it's polarized me where there's I have super strong strengths and these weaknesses that, I don't want to just let them be who I am forever. Like my when I want to speak to someone, sometimes I might just stare at them. Like I just sit there like just like blank face. And I have a flat affect too. So some people would be like think that there's a problem. Like that's probably an intersectionality thing too, because
like my friend says, oh my gosh, she's so funny. Rakaya says, you good?
and in
Like the
my
4 different levels of you good.
literally that can mean so many things. It's like in my community, sometimes if we look at each other the wrong way, it's like, yo, you got a problem? Good, like what's good? Pretty good. And it's like, no, like I just like your shirt or something like that.
You know, and it's just like, Michael, I love talking to you so much. Oh my gosh. I knew we were gonna have a great conversation. I just did. I just knew it because you're such an amazing person. But it's like, when you grow up and you don't know your neurotype, but you just know you're different. Because, like, I mean, it's not like we don't feel it. We know it. We feel it. I mean, we have experienced the fact that we don't necessarily fit in the same way other people seem to, like, seamlessly fit. And I mean, I would buy the same exact earrings. I would make sure my fingernail polish was the same color as the other girls. I would make sure I would watch how they walked, like how they would talk, how they would do their hair. I would do the exact same thing. And it was like I had just spray painted myself neon orange. It
Yeah.
did it wasn't working. It was like somehow when I did it, it stood out and was weird, right?
Yeah.
And so you then have those moments where you discover, like, maybe in class you really like something, you're passionate about it, or maybe you're just really good at something. And this even kind of followed me into adulthood, and you find you have a strength, or because you're naturally interested in something. So of course, our brains, we're going to dive into all the information and we're going to retain it, and then we're like Encyclopedia Brown with whatever the topic is. And we can find somebody that says, oh, they're interested in it, and then we're like, oh, great. And then we like info dump them, and then they're just like deer in the headlights. Oh my god, get me away from this woman that just talked my arrow for an hour and a half about vision science. So we have those things. And there's also, it kind of goes back to that spiky profile thing where, oh, I'm good at this. That's my strength. People respond to that and then acknowledge it. So that's what I need to do more of. And the things that we're not good of, it's like we get to where we hide it, or we do whatever we can to, like, minimize the fact that anybody knows that we struggle. Because if anybody knows that we struggle, then somehow we're not worthy. We're not good enough, and we failed yet again. It doesn't matter that I'm good at this. And even the things that, like, we can be really good at doesn't necessarily mean that we enjoy it. But then somehow we end up getting stuck doing it on any kind of group or committee. It's like, oh, you're really good at that. Why don't you do that? And it's like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll do that again.
And what I've noticed too is that there's um, when it comes to like talking to people who are neurotypical about certain things that I struggle with, it's like their approach to solving problems is so different than mine that, like, in some situations it was kind of effectively like just do it. And I was like, if I could just do it, then I would have done it. So that must not be the issue. Um, which then cycled around to why I wound up like going so deeply into psychology. It's like I'm even kind of unpacking this a little bit right now, is that is to look for solutions. Um, and even like my ability to articulate was also looking for solutions because I remember being very young. Well, first thing what happened was when I can remember when I first learned how to talk, and my family was like, can we go back to that last week? Because I just would not stop. I just kept going. But
Yes.
I remember looking through the dictionary because I was very frustrated about like I need to know figure out how to say what is on my mind. So I like literally look through, read the whole thing, and I'd find a bunch of other words, and like that's basically how I got articulate. I just find other words, and I wouldn't find the word I was looking for, but I find other stuff. So it's just like I just wound up knowing that, and really that actually happened with science too, where I was looking for something else, um, and I went to the librarian. I was like, "Do you have books on quasars or something like that?" And they're looking at me like, "Here's a seventh grade kid talking about quasars. What? We don't have that, but you can look at those chemistry books over there." And I was like, "Okay." And I read through all of them, and I didn't find what I was looking for. So I just wound up knowing chemistry. So that would be how that goes around. And then I'm in chemistry class now. My teacher teaching it wrong. Um, she's teaching the molecules wrong. And I'm like, actually, miss, it goes like this. And then people are looking at me like, this kid is so smart. How does he know about chemistry? And for me, like, it's just, I just happened to have looked into it. Because I was so fervently looking for this one piece of information that I actually never found. I didn't never find it. I found it later, but I didn't find it at the time. So it's just like, I coincidentally know this information that is pushing me into this intellectual smart bubble that people have of me, of that like, oh, he's so smart, he knows everything about science and da 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 da. So then when I finally get to the point towards the end of the semester, like the end of the year, where I finally land on some stuff that I don't know, and there's no one there to help me because everybody's like, oh, he's good, you know, they're all off over there. I go to the teacher, I'm like, hey miss, can you help me with this? I don't know how to do it. She goes, I failed chemistry in college. And I was like, how are you my teacher then? That just didn't make any sense at all. And I feel like that's sort of a microcosm for um a kind of my experience being distinct, especially in my community and my family. I don't really fault them for how they reacted to certain things because um we didn't have these conversations. We weren't privy to it. They also didn't have the internet. So they didn't have the ability to like if their mom said that the earth was flat, they couldn't just Google it and see that that's wrong, for example. So I think that's the beauty of like the time that we're in now is that we have the ability to access information on our own terms.
I love how you just described how information comes into my world too. And if you guys were so relating to what Michael just said, oh my gosh, right there with you. I would go, okay, so for my 20th birthday, I said, I want an unabridged dictionary. I don't know a whole lot of folks that would have asked at 20 years old for an unabridged dictionary, right?
Right.
But it was because I had read an art history article and there was a word in that article that didn't quite make sense to me. And I love words. I'm a word nerd. I love linguistics. I love root words and what's the Latin and what's the Greek? You know, where did it come from? How did it evolve? I'm that kind of word nerd. So when I read that article and there was a word in there, and I don't remember what the word was today, which is kind of crazy because at the time I was obsessed, like obsessed. I could not close the loop on that thought because I had read that article and the word didn't quite make sense to me. And I looked at the context, I did all the stuff and I just couldn't figure it out. So I told my parents, I think it was for Christmas actually, I want an unabridged dictionary. So I get the unabridged dictionary for Christmas. I go immediately, unwrap it, go immediately for the word. It is not in the dang unabridged dictionary. And I'm like, it's not in here. So then I go back to school. I go back and find the article. I reach out directly to the person who wrote the article. He was a professor at another university. And he said, oh, that's my word. And I'm like, You jerk. What part of like putting an asterisk and defining a word that you've made up at the end of this article didn't occur to you? I
Hilarious.
was so mad. But it's like that. It's like I got in there and went to look for the word. The next thing I know, I've read like 30, 40 pages and absorbed all these new words. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Or anytime I would go look for information, I would find all these other things. And then I would like, oh, well, I read it, but I would catalog it, right? It was like almost
Yeah.
I would catalog the information. It's not like I was like actively learning it. I was just reading it and just absorbing it in the way my brain absorbed it. And I'd be in a conversation or something, I don't know, 6 months, a year, 10 years later. And it's like, oh, one time I read this thing and it was like so and so. And people are like, oh my God, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know. I was looking for something one day and I just happened to read it.
This is exactly how it happens. It's like, what are you doing? Oh yeah, I'm right now. I'm watching a video on the mating habits of dolphins. I don't know how I got here, but it's very interesting. Um, that is very relatable. I got my mom to buy me a mathematics book in middle school. Actually, it had like calculus and derivatives and stuff and all that in there. Um, and really, this also cycles around to like um, something that's important to me, which is like spirituality, which is I don't know if I got into this during the intersectionality conversation, but it is an intersection. It is an intersectionality thing where of like racial identity combined with being neurodistinct, combined with the information that I was receiving, combined with like my natural interests. So the reason that I got into math and science was because I learned how to. Wouldn't say I learned how to speak late, but I was like a late speaker. Like I was like 3 and I wasn't talking. Um, and they hired a speech therapist, and then the speech therapist would talk to me, and then I would talk. And now I look back and I realize I just was only comfortable talking in certain scenarios. So I would talk to the speech therapist. The speech therapist would go to my parents and be like, "Hey, your son can talk," and then they'd come in, and then I would stop talking. I would just sit there quiet. And they're like, "No, he can't talk. You're fired." Um, so my dad took it uh, in his own hands, and he's like, "I'm gonna buy my son a bunch of like math books and da da da, and like stimulate his mind that way." Um, and that was successful, probably more successful than anticipated. I got so into this stuff. I was so into these like math problems. I'm like, this is the godsend. Like I got so into it that like I literally just ran over the horizon with all of that. So I just like my dad would be like doing taxes or something like that, and I'd run up to him and I'd be like, "Do you know that the diameter of Jupiter is?" He's like, "Michael, please, Michael, please. I'm trying to do something here. I'm like, adult situation stuff like that." And then I'd run to my sister. I'd be like, "Do you think that angels come from Mars? Because in the Bible it says that they came down and they had physical form and they were interacting with humans." And my sister would be like, "I'm done with you. I'm not having this conversation. I'm going somewhere else." Um, so
Oh, see,
like,
I totally have that conversation with you.
so my mind was just like running, and like that's kind of, I think what sent me, what really planted the seed of like curiosity and intrigue and like passion for like the unknown for me. And because of like those experiences, that became something that really was done in my own time. I wanted okay. I realized pretty quickly that like people, like if they're not interested in it, obviously they're not gonna want to have that conversation. And it took a long time to not take that personal, because for me, I was like, I'm identifying with these things. I'm like, this is so cool. How do you not see how cool this stuff is? Um, but realizing that, okay, um, like I for some reason am extremely attracted to Jupiter. I'm very into math, and I'm also very creative. So um, there was the whole left and right brain thing that they have, where it's like if you're right brain, then you're creative. If you're left brain, then you're mathematical. I was always like, I'm both. How can you separate the two? That doesn't make sense to me. Um, And I'm trying to remember exactly what point in my life it was, but there was some point in time where um, it really all like kind of compounds on top of each other. So there was a point in time where I started realizing that like my interest in Africa connected to these interests. So um, there's a lot of civilizations like Kemet and Kush, um, where these are things like looking into those cultures will make you realize that like basically like black people have been into this kind of stuff since the very beginning, like been into math and these philosophers that studied in Egypt. um, so when I started realizing that, it's a certain story started unfolding where I realized that it wasn't just because like I like there had to like not every kid is gonna pick up a math book and be drawn to it. So I think that an important distinction that I had to make was um, like when a lot of it, this happened for me and my sister a lot actually growing up, where like adults would come up to my family and they'd like pour praises onto the kids, like, oh, your kids are so great, how'd you get your kids like that, like my kids don't do that, and my dad would go, some assembly required, which is hilarious. But
I
it
love
took
it.
it took me a while to realize that like to separate, because I felt like for me, from my perspective, it felt like I wanted to have ownership over like my positive traits, as well as my ownership over my negative traits, which that is like very much goes into like the neurodivergence there. Um, but as I began to understand like and take ownership over like those positive traits and realize that it was it's like I'm always gonna have this interest. Like I don't have to go into a career in math or a career in science in order to resonate with these things, because they actually are spiritual. And when I came into that aspect of it, where it's like I can still engage and still resonate with like looking at the stars, getting into math, writing and journaling, and a lot of things that we associate with like self care and like the mental health craze and whatnot. A lot of things that are um, like, for lack of a better term, have like become kind of trendy, um, which I don't find an inherent problem with it. But realizing, I'm even like trying to paint the context of like realizing that I basically didn't want my interests to have to fit into capitalism. And that's okay. That's really okay. That's why I said intersectionality. So realizing that
Yeah, because you're really good at this. You should go do it and make money at it.
exactly. So
Like,
like that
that's the message we all get, right?
precisely. So that whole thing of like, oh, he likes math so much, so he's gonna go to MIT. He's gonna be a chemical engineer and da, da, da. And then I was going along with it, and I started realizing it's like, why do I just don't care? Like I just don't care. Um, and it's realizing, okay, because like this is I don't have to pimp out my strengths just to just to just to be with him. Um, Calibrating um, and the intersectionality thing with identity, blackness, um, and I talked about how these things connect to like original culture and a lot of things with like neurodivergence and some of the experiences that I was having like early on with the burnouts and the meltdowns and whatnot. I began to recontextualize these experiences through a spiritual lens. Like I would have psychotic breakdowns and things like that. I had hallucinations and things like that. Um, and in the beginning, like I was saying, I thought I was going crazy and whatnot. And my identity and my understanding of self was not only within being neurotypical, but it was also within like the lens of um, like religious dogma and Christianity, and mixed with capitalism, subconsciously mixed with capitalism. So I think around 2016, between 2016 and 2019, all these things began breaking down. And because they were breaking down internally, I started seeing that reflected outwards. Um, and it only came to a point where, okay, it's like, I, uh, in this book called The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Malidoma Patrice Somé, he speaks on how people who are neurodivergent were actually honored in other cultures. They were the shamans, they were the medicine doctors, they were the oracles, they were the people that like we went to for help, and then that got replaced by the priest, um, and so on and so forth. So um, somebody recommended me that book because I was kind of doing what I'm doing right now. I was going on the stream of consciousness, and they're like, "You're saying a lot of things that are in this book, so I feel like you would really like it." Um, and I think that aspect. This is also answering the question of like, why do I call myself Michael the Starseed? Um, is all wrapped in together, where understanding myself as a neurodivergent person and understanding, my spiritual gift is like one in this, like growing up and like reading scripture and like I would say, oh, I think it means this. And adults would look at me like, how do you know that? Like, oh, he's gift of God, blessed, da da da, is the same thing that makes my room messy. Like it's the same. It's not
Exactly.
non-separable thing. It's like, well, Jesus made his bed after. It's like, okay, but he was 33. Um, he was
And did he really have 3 pillows, a dust ruffle, a sheet, and a comforter? No.
no, he
Less
didn't.
executive function steps, folks.
Um, and thank you for saying executive function because I was looking for that term for a while now. That was the first thing that came up to me. The term executive dysfunction was the first thing I noticed where I was like, okay, there's things that I want to do today that I'm clearly not doing it. And even if I think in my head I want to do this thing or I write down that I do this thing, it'll be like the next day and I'm like, hey, I didn't do it. So what happened? And that inserting that back there in that other conversation, the other stream. Um, so I was talking about like how I became Michael the Starseed, realizing that okay, these are all the consequences and ramifications of having just one singular gift, one singular blessing. Um, and I think I'm just gonna actually leave it there because that's a mic drop moment.
I love it. And to bring this together, because I think that it's such a beautiful thing, because to me, math and art are the same.
Yes.
They are interwoven. They are the breath that is the inhale and the exhale. And all of that is very spiritual because we are all energetic beings. We are inhabiting this embodiment, and our experience is all things. It isn't just that we have one thing here and we compartmentalize, and so much of modern society tries to do that.
Mm-hmm.
However, we make things more difficult and more challenging, and we create disruption and disconnect by trying to box all of these things in their own place
Right.
and failing to recognize that it is all connected. We are all connected, one
Right.
being to another, and to bring around the science to the creation and the artistry, which is you and your poetry. I would love for you to read and share the poem that you read the other night that was so beautiful because it really touched me. Your words, how you phrased everything in this poem moved the atoms of my being.
Mm. I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that because today I was reflecting on like why I do this in the first place. It's easy as a creative and an artist to get caught up in the career aspect of things. And something that I was just like tapping back into was remembering that at first it was an emotional regulation tool, but also I got to a point where, like in high school, when I would perform like my poetry, people would come up to me after, and they would express that they feel like I said something about their experience that they weren't able to put to words, and I find that very important. And I feel like there's uh, uh, there's a there's an aspect of life that's like in the shadows, that I seek to bring to light just by continuing to do what I do. And it moves me also when I know that, my poetry can touch others and describe something and bring it more to conscious awareness. So that being said, I shall here's this piece called If I Do Say So Myself. If I do say so myself, a voice inside my head tells me I'm an awkward bitch, that I say all the wrong things and I can't be fixed. A voice inside my head tells me they don't like me, and they never will, dog. I don't know why you resist. A voice inside my head tells me, see, I'm still here and I always will be. Did you think that you grew out of this? Nobody will define to me what is and is not a big deal. Diminish your fears, dwindle your triumphs. Only I know the depth of what I feel. David and Goliath in the same flesh stand on a battlefield no one else can see. I take aim, the bullseye ajna, and shoot my shot for a chance to be. Thank you.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this conversation and getting to meet and just share some time here with Michael Peterson and myself today. You can connect with Michael on Instagram at Michael the Starseed, and I'm going to have his Instagram link down in the show notes below. Come join us over in LinkedIn in Sydney's group called Nextability if you are looking for conversations around intersectionality on the spectrum. Because, hey, we are in there having these conversations, and Michael was in there sharing, and that's where I met Michael. And be sure that you also know that you have a light to shine in the world. And Michael is, if you're listening and not watching, Michael is geared up in, my favorite color, yellow, and he's wearing my sunflowers today, which I absolutely love. And you guys know that's the symbol for the Shine a Light Autistic Advocate campaign. And this year, everything is all around accessibility. And Michael, I hope that you will join us as an advocate and be a part of the accessibility panels this month coming up in April for Shine a Light campaign for autistic advocates, elevating our voice and our conversations around accessibility, because you already model this and show up in the world and you shine your light so brightly. And it is such a warm, beautiful, glowing light. And I am so, so honored to have been bathed in it tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I would love to. I didn't even plan that. That's crazy.
See, greater knowing always guides us.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Guys, tune in next week. Don't miss all the amazing things coming up for April. And last year's Shine a Light campaign, we had so many amazing advocates. We didn't just do April, we did May too. So stick around. Don't miss any of those great things, including the articles on the Brain Dump blog. See you next week, guys. Bye-bye.